You know, I I was speaking with my wife last evening, and she shared with me that um, one of the events that transpired in the past that has been utilized against me is a situation where I ended up showing up to my stake president's home after midnight. Um, and this experience, I mean, I guess if you just say it just like that, it might sound a little odd, but there's more details to that than what's being shared. Now, one of the things that I learned in the abuse that I have experienced from the Mormon Church, I've had to learn about forms of manipulation that I honestly um, I wasn't smart enough to understand before. Um, but the term propaganda um, can include this concept of stacking the deck, which is a reference to, playing cards, um, basically cheating, arranging the cards in a way so that the cards fall in their favor. And when you choose to share information, if you as a person are omitting truth or leaving out details in order to shift the story to sound different than what is true, that is a form of deception. That is a form of dishonesty. That is a form of lying. Um, and so to realize that someone that I once trusted, that I thought was my friend, ended up taking a situation that was completely benign and manipulating it to sound like freakishly weird. Dude, that sucks, man. To have someone, that's supposed to be a high priest of God doing this. So here's the reality of what happened. Keith Forsburg and I were both communicating with each other via text message that same evening, well beyond midnight. He and I were just chatting. Like, again, I thought the guy was my friend. I was up late. He was up late. And at one point, the conversation touched on this movie that I remembered seeing as a kid, called the Buttercream Gang, or maybe the Butter Churn Gang, or something like that. And it was a story about, some kid that went off to the city, and he experienced, kind of a hard life, and came back to a small town, where his roots were. And, the people basically loved him instead of, alienating him. And anyway, I was using this movie as a reference to make a point. And Keith said to me that he would be interested in seeing that movie. And I'm like, well, I'm awake. He's awake. I know where he lives. Like, I've been there before. I had to drop off paperwork or something at one point. But I just went over to deliver a movie. I thought I was having a conversation with a friend of mine. I didn't realize that I was doing something that was just completely socially retarded. I genuinely didn't, and I'm sorry. Um, I thought I was talking to my friend on the phone. I thought I was just like, cool, man. He's awake. I'm awake. He says he wants this. Why not just drop over and drop it off and see the guy? Like, we're both awake at these odd hours. And And then when I showed up there, I sent him a message and I'm like, yo, bro, I'm outside, and he like freaked out. He's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, I was just bringing the movie over. And he's like, I'm not even home, dude. He's like, I'm out of town. And I was like, oh, whoops. And so I got back in my car and I left. But because I rang the doorbell, and because it was after midnight, and because his wife didn't know that I was having a conversation with him, because his wife was unaware, now this whole situation has been manipulated and exaggerated into being something that it never was. And it was used against me. That's just horrible, that a church that claims to, have the truth, it can't even be led by people who are willing to tell the truth. And this, again, it broke my heart, that someone that I genuinely trusted, someone that I thought was my friend, would do that. But in hindsight, Keith Forsburg demonstrated a couple of attributes that, again, they challenged me. There was a time that I was in his office and we were talking, and Keith Forsburg shared a story about another man in his stake who is a member. And this man, I guess, has his own neurological limitations. Maybe the guy's slow or something, but basically the way Keith spoke about him was that the guy was not blessed with intelligence by any, stretch of imagination. And the guy was, I guess, traveling down the highway at some point years ago. This was before I ever lived in the valley, I guess. And the guy had a horse that he put on a flatbed trailer, And Keith was literally mocking this man, making fun of, how stupid he was and, the fact that he did this. But this is an inactive member of the church. And my soul was really, hurting after that conversation. And I was afraid to speak up because, again, this guy, he's above me, right? He's a high priest. And if this is the way that he's talking and acting and stuff, who am I to challenge this man? But I did. I ended up sending him a message at one point and just said, dude, I don't think it was right that we did that we were sitting here, making fun of this man, based on, his weaknesses or the curriculum that God gave to him. But yeah, I mean, Keith is Keith, Keith's allowed to be who he is in his own progression as a man. But if Keith is willing to manipulate truth and, misrepresent facts and details, that does not align with, the version of himself that he might like to paint for other people, because he describes himself as being like some, 90-degree angle, letter of the law accountant that, does things by the book. And the truth of the matter is, he's a man that works for an accounting firm that he openly admitted to me was demonstrating practices that were unethical, and that he knew that his firm was doing things that were unethical, and that they specifically did not assign him to the contracts where there was opportunity for more money because Keith might screw it up for them. And so if Keith knows that the organization that he literally works for is demonstrating behavior patterns that are contrary to the framework of the teachings of the church, this is the stake president, mind you, okay? The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints presents questions to every member of the stake for a temple recommend renewal. And one of them has to do with, are you affiliated with any organizations whose practices, are contrary to ... basically the teachings of Jesus Christ. And yeah, Keith works for a firm that is literally doing exactly that, and he knew it, and he said nothing because they were feeding his paycheck. And that's just the reality of Keith Forsburg as a man. Keith may be my brother, but Keith is a sellout in ways that he would rather scapegoat members of his own flock than to stand up like a damn man and take accountability for what he's done wrong. And I feel bad that Keith has chosen to hide his sins in the least degree of allowance, because I'll tell you what, I used to have so much respect for Keith. I really did. And the day that he made a few of these decisions, okay, that sucked. But then when he was unwilling to simply confess his sins, take accountability, own the ugliness of his own opportunities for improvement, boom, the example's gone. Amen to the priesthood and the authority in Keith, because he's no longer willing or capable to demonstrate the example of righteousness that needs to be set for those within his stewardship, which is that when we arrive at those points where we as men are faced with our own weaknesses, the example that Jesus Christ desires from us is humility. It's our willingness to bear witness of our weaknesses, to set the example for the next generation that, hey, it's not about trying to save face. It's about being humble in the weaknesses that God has given us, because through doing so, we gain light and knowledge. We turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones, you know? So again, man, my wife told me about this last night, and she mentioned that the conversation that she had with, the upper echelon of the church, discriminating against her, because I have, mental health afflictions, that one of the statements that was made to her is, well, we've given your husband, chances to comply or something like that. I don't even know. But, his conduct and the examples of his conduct, and then cited, like showing up to members' houses, in the all hours of the night. And it's like one situation that occurred between two people that I thought I was friends with this guy. Would a friend choose to use something like that against you? No. Does someone that actually loves their neighbor as themselves misrepresent details, leave out details, omit truth, and allow for facts to be manipulated so that other people perceive a situation inaccurately? Like, if you love your neighbor as yourself, are you going to do that? No. And yet this is what my stake president chose to do. So my question, being the undesirable Mormon as I am, hey, that's cool. Leave me out of the church. I got no desire to return, okay? I'm not trying to come back and attend church where I'm not wanted. But I would really love to finish studying, the church. I'd really love to have that privilege. So here's one of my inquiries. I remember a story that exists in Mormon history, and this is not one that is denied. This is an unfortunate story that the church knows did in fact transpire. There is no denying it. They have incorporated it into their teachings. And there was a group of members that were traveling, and unfortunately they came in contact with another group of travelers that they were afraid of or worried about for one reason or another. And the man that was in charge of that group, the presiding high priest, if you will, literally made the decision to act in violence against this other group of travelers, based on fear, based on, their projected idea of what they thought the situation was. There was one individual that recognized this is seriously wrong. And he tried to get a letter to Salt Lake City because he recognized that what was happening was wrong. By the time Salt Lake City was able to become actually aware of what was happening and to respond, it was already too late. The high priest who had been in charge of that stewardship literally led his own flock astray in acting in violence against other children of God in ways that absolutely creates iniquity and is just a sad blemish of an experience. Now, for me, as a student of life, I think that story deserves to be picked apart in several different ways. One, like what was going on with that high priest who felt like maybe he had revelation to do that, when in reality the leaders of the church were like, no, like you're misreading something here, buddy, pump the brakes. So like the subject of revelation obviously is something that I think deserves to be discussed with great more like amount of transparency and detail than the muddy water that Mormonism as a culture currently justifies. But beyond that, like that one man, he was willing to stand up for what he knew was right, and he wasn't wrong. But in the face of his whole congregation, they all thought that he was wrong. They all sided with, their ecclesiastic leader and went on to do the abominable thing that they did. Sometimes in life, just like as, the Mormons teach out of their own scriptures, the Book of Mormon, there's examples of stories about high priests that have become wayward and they're no longer doing things in order. Like the Lord's house is supposed to be a house of order where all things are done in wisdom and in order, and that the people who are stewards over whatever their stewardship may be, that they have a responsibility to make correct decisions for those within their stewardship. And in the Book of Mormon, there's a story about this dude named Abinadi who goes in and he calls out, this high priest who's running things. And he's like, bro, what you guys are doing is wrong. You're making decisions that are coming at the expense of other people. This needs to be corrected. And King Noah is so offended, like, who do you think you are telling me that I'm wrong? Like, you're beneath me, right? And so he sees Abinadi as like nobody and acts against him, and this is a story. But again and again, we have scenarios where within the gospel, within the story of existence, there arrives a man, or, in some cases, women, I'm sure, that are willing to make decisions that literally manufacture what Jesus Christ called iniquity. And again, I remind you, Jesus Christ said, there will be many who cry out, Lord, Lord, did we not do these things in your name? And he will say to them, depart from me, ye workers of iniquity. So if you're sincerely a disciple of Jesus Christ, then you know that it's not in your desire to be someone that justifies iniquity that comes at the expense of someone within your stewardship. To do so would be contrary to the literal example of Christ. And again, we got all these situations where you got these men of God, these prophets, and these prophetesses even that are like standing up for truth, and they're trying to, be whistleblowers on the darkness in the world. So what does the Mormon Church teach about the subject of unrighteous dominion and what to actually do when it starts to occur? Because we've already got that one bishop out in the Midwest who resigned from his calling because of unrighteous dominion. We have got thousands, literally thousands of souls who have contributed their witness and testimony against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because of unrighteous dominion on like the Mormon stories, thing. And like no other religion in the world has a group of wounded, members that are literally advocating and preaching against, the unrighteousness and the fraud that is occurring because the teachings are not aligning with what's actually being done in the way that Mormons do, right? But yeah, again, hey, I've been accused of some crazy stuff by these Mormons. In a, how does it go? In a debate where the facts don't count, it's like a spelling bee where spelling doesn't count. So because the facts don't count with these Mormons, they just leave out details so they can stack the deck so that they can be right. That is, again, one of the behavior patterns of unrighteousness that these children of God are unfortunately demonstrating. And I get it. Like I've been guilty of the same thing at one point in my own life. I felt the desire to avoid accountability, like a scared little child. And, I left out details like, we've all demonstrated these behavior patterns. It's when we see the pattern of behavior in ourselves, do we care enough to correct the pattern of behavior, And all of us as people, we progress line upon line and precept upon precept. So the point at which one person might see the pattern in their life might be a completely different point than what someone else might see it in theirs. But the relativity of the soul's progression is its own. And only when the choices of our brothers or sisters here on earth trespass against us, only then are we justified to provide an open rebuke. At that point, because of the fact that they have violated the laws of God according to the commandments of Jesus Christ himself, ye must be instant in your rebuke, both in season and out of season. Fear not the revilement of men. Men are going to pop off. They're going to crash out. They're going to be like, oh, who are you to tell me I'm wrong, right? I've got videos for days. I can show you people doing stuff like that. I hired a contractor here to do some work on my house one day. And the guy was deliberately milking the clock, told me he'd have the job done by a certain time. I went out and it wasn't. I went out again. It wasn't. Finally, the third time I said, hey, man, I just want to point out to you that when I hired you, this is what you had communicated to me. But now we're into this situation and it's turning into something different. And just me saying that, just pointing out the reality of what he was manipulating and trying to do intentionally, this dude crashed out so hard. I got a little scared. I pulled out my phone and I just started recording this guy. I literally, provided that video as evidence in the court case against him because it got a little hairy. But yeah, some people, man, they just don't want to be told that they're wrong. They have self-worth issues inside of themselves where anyone holding up the mirror for them in any way, showing them that something that they've done has opportunity for improvement, it feels like an attack on their soul, like an attack on the version of themselves in their mind that they've created for themselves. And the fact that you're willing to hold up the mirror in the way that God commanded you to do, they're offended by you. Like, who do you think you are? Oh, you think you're better than me? And it's like, no, I'm genuinely trying to defend the golden rule and basic boundaries, okay? And you made a decision that violated the second great commandment of God in a manner that literally created iniquity that I have now suffered the consequence because of your choice. But if I illuminate this to you, you use tactics that I'm not necessarily always smart enough to pick up on. I had to learn that one of the tactics that, these kinds of narcissistic personalities use, it's called table turning, where you'll come in to try your best to address conflict and to turn a stumbling block into a stepping stone. And you're a little nervous because, you don't want to offend them by saying the wrong thing, but they might not take it well. And they shift the focus entirely from whatever they did to, oh yeah, well, here's something that's wrong with you. Why don't we focus on the fact that you're guilty of this? Or, oh yeah, well, you do that too. And it's a shifting of blame. It's a judgment redirection. You're coming to them saying, hey, we were, getting along fine in life, and on the dance floor of life, you stepped on my toes. I just wanted to let you know so that, we can avoid that in the future, please. And they're so offended that you would dare suggest that they're not the world's greatest dancer or something. Or they're just bothered that someone would demonstrate, I guess, that pattern of righteousness. I don't know. I mean, Jesus Christ does say, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. And for me, the reality is every last member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and every member of my eternal family, every member of this earth will eventually come to understand that I was not lying when I told you that Jesus Christ leveraged upon me the teaching in the 18th chapter of the book of Matthew. And while in my 30s, at a point of frustration because I'm being bullied to my breaking point by Mormons, I'm standing out the side of my property over here, and in a blasphemous prayer, I literally, just cried out, "What the fuck do you want me to do? This isn't my church. Like, I'm not in charge of these things. What do you want me to do?" And like, again, not a righteous way to speak to your Heavenly Father. Thank heavens he is, an individual that has tremendous patience and long suffering, and, but again, that's not a righteous example. We shouldn't speak to God that way. But I did, and that was real. And the answer that he leveraged to me was basically to point out to me, "Hey, buddy, here's a commandment right here in the scriptures that you've read over in your own life before, and it meant nothing to you. It's been taught in church, but people don't actually practice it. The Mormon church literally does not apply this teaching at all in the ways that they could or should. And yet Joseph Smith literally expounded upon this specific teaching in the Doctrine and Covenants. And the Mormon church doesn't even apply the teachings and the revelations given by Joseph Smith on the subject of conflict resolution that Jesus Christ has authored for the world. And so here I am, angry with God, and his answer to me is, "Hey, buddy, you're not smart enough to get out of your own way." That's essentially what it was. And yeah, I am who I am. I'm dumber than a box of rocks. I don't know what I don't know. But God pointed out to me that I had the obligation to apply that commandment. And when he told me that, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I know how these people are going to respond. If I start to tell them when they trespass against me, like, I know how they're going to react. Like, this is not going to go well. And the Lord basically called me out for, being a whiny little punk that, just because that's the relationship that I've got with him. And he's like, "Hey, put up or shut up, but you asked, so here it is." And, he's not actually that curt with me. That's just me projecting myself onto him. But I'm not a liar. I know that Jesus Christ lives. And I bear witness before the world that the teachings on conflict resolution that are found in the 18th chapter of Matthew, specifically verses 15, 16, and again, I will note that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is epically failing to apply and provide verse 17 to their membership in a manner that would be in harmony with an organization that was actually a stewardship for God's children. If God describes that, upon this rock I will build my church, and then describes attributes of what's going on with the church that he's building, and then Mormons say, "Hey, we're that church," but then they're not doing what Christ literally said they're supposed to be doing, and it's being done in ways that literally are coming at the expense of others, literally giving power to the devil to afflict the lives of others in ways that God never intended. And yet Mormons are like, "La, la, 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 we're chosen, we're better than you." And it's like, oh my gosh, are you guys really so stupid that you can't see the storyline in your own Book of Mormon playing out in your own damn lives right now? So, anyway, I'm just crazy Ben, but I'm going to be true to me. I'm going to be true to who I am as a person. I've spent enough years of my life trying to be what someone else told me I have to be in order to be good enough, to be deserving of love. If you're in a situation where someone's going to judge you based on the relativity of your progression in life, and they're going to withhold blessings from you, and they're going to bear false witness against and act against you, that person doesn't love you. That person doesn't actually have the pure love of Christ. And Jesus Christ teaches, by this ye may know, if men are my disciples, if they have love one for another. My stake president does not love me if the man is lying about me. My stake president, who made the same baptismal promise that I did, to bear one another's burdens, to be light, and to mourn with those that mourn, and comfort those who stand in need of comfort, he doesn't care about the discomfort that he causes for those within his own stewardship, because he cares so much about how he sees himself in his own mind. He cares so much about being right and trying to hide the things that he's done wrong that he's willing to scapegoat children of God that are within his stewardship. This is not a pattern of righteousness that anyone should follow, ever. If I, as a man, were willing to try and scapegoat my own child to save face for myself, I'm as sad and miserable as my own mother is. You know what I mean? Like, this poor woman will sit here and throw her own children under the bus in ways that, she's hopefully stopped doing it by now because I've called her out for it for so long. But she sits here and keeps throwing me under the bus in ways that she's literally gossiping about her own children. And I'm thinking, lady, you're literally talking about your failed stewardship. You're ragging on your own children, who are a representation of your efforts as a mother. If your children failed to measure up to some standard of performance and you're judging them and throwing them away as undesirable, I think that says more about you as a mother than it did about that child. But hey, that right there, that's the war of paradigm that I'm having right now with the Mormon Church. And I'm not afraid of being honest about these paradigm issues that are taking place, because I genuinely believe, based on the actions and choices of these leaders, that they are guilty of authoring confusion. Now, if the choices that they are making trespass against those within their stewardship, what is the responsibility that they have for righteousness as an example? Right? You know what I mean? And that's the accountability of the people that are in positions of leadership. But we live in a world where the devil has twisted it, and the people who are in leadership are in like a top down, looking down on people. That's not leadership. That is not leadership. Let me explain leadership to you. Leadership is not a pyramid in the way that you might think of, like the pyramids of Egypt. Leadership is a pyramid in the other direction. And everyone within your stewardship is upon your shoulders. They are not beneath you, for which you stand. Jesus Christ is at the head of that leadership. He is at the bottom. He descended below all things. He didn't lift himself above. That was what the devil tried to tempt Christ with. Was, hey, come on, just come be my buddy, be my friend. We'll work together and you can have all of this, right? And he's like, nah, man, I'm not seeking after the honors of men. I'm here to set the example that our Father wanted me to set. I'm here to do the will of our Father, And what a good son in that regard. But nevertheless, this top-down pyramid, that's not what leadership looks like. That's the equivalent of Mormons talking about the difference between a shepherd and a sheep herder. A sheep herder will drive them from behind. A sheep herder is a top-down leadership. A shepherd is a bottom-up leadership, meaning that they literally place themselves beneath all things. They recognize that if one member of my family is struggling, all of the members within my family will be struggling. They choose not to discriminate against the least of these, their brethren, who are within their stewardship, in order to focus on the popular ones so that they can make themselves look good. Like, take a look at Mayor Mamdani in New York City and how he is absolutely destroying this city. That is bad leadership. That is a man who's making decisions like he's playing a video game without recognizing that there are literally human lives that are being like dramatically impacted. But he's so far above those experiences that he's desensitized himself. You know, contrast that with the man that I was named after. I love that example. King Benjamin in the Book of Mormon. You know, just the narrative, the story of King Benjamin is a cool story. Whether you believe the Book of Mormon is true or whether you think it's completely fictional, regardless, it has nothing to do with the ability to take a story like The Little Engine That Could and extract the value from it. And in the narrative of King Benjamin, he was a king. He had a kingdom. He had people within his kingdom with which he was like the supreme leader, I guess, for a lack of a better term. But he wasn't the kind of man that chose to, you know, sit up in his castle and throw out commands and make himself feel all big and fancy like, you know, King Noah did. No, King Benjamin was someone that he was like a man of the people. You know, he's the kind of guy that he's down there in the fields working with his people, you know, digging the trenches. He's laboring alongside those within his kingdom, you know. That was the example of King Benjamin. That was the name that was given to me. I was told as a child that I was named after that king. So the example of King Benjamin to me, it was always very special because that was what righteousness looked like. Someone that even though they had power, they didn't use it to aggrandize themselves. Even though they had responsibility and stewardship, it's not about how they see themselves. It's just they're kind of a gear in the machine, you know? If I could compare it to anything, think of a car engine. You know, you got an alternator, you got, you know, the motor itself, you got the battery plugged in over here, you got wires crossing over, you got your starter. There's all these different components that work together in order for the machine to get down the road. Now, a king might be perceived by some people as being the engine itself. Okay, cool. But any intelligent king knows that you are only as good as the wheels underneath you, as the alternator that continues to replace the energy. Like, you are only as good as those that you've surrounded yourself with, you know? It's not about you being like, oh, I'm so much better than all of you. You would be nothing without my engine. You wouldn't even get down the road, because they can all say the same thing. Well, yeah, you're not going to get very far without us either. You know, and that's the intelligence or the wisdom, you know, of Jesus Christ, because even though he is the King of Kings, he didn't come to set himself up to be worshipped. I do call myself a disciple of Christ. I do not call myself a Christian. The reason that I do not call myself a Christian is because I understand that to be in error, in the same way that it's incorrect for African American men to go around calling one another nigga. They've embraced a derogatory term in an attempt to take the power out of it, because that's the best that they knew how to do. You know, and bless their hearts, it sucks being bullied, it sucks being devalued by people, you know, having names labeled against you to try and, you know, like, these are just bad ways. You don't treat people that way if you love your neighbor as yourself. Black people don't deserve to be devalued based on the color of their skin. That's not a teaching that I align with as a disciple of Christ. God is not a respecter of persons, meaning he's not caring whether or not you are, some rich white English dude living in a castle, or if you're some dirt poor, South American person living in, a hut in a third world country, or if you're an African living over in, the Gambia, and you're sitting there, being one of only 7 people, or 1 out of every 7 that doesn't have the privilege of running water and electricity. That person doesn't deserve to feel less about themselves based on the cards that they've been dealt in life. And we live in a world where there's this self-worth system, this lie that's told by the devil, that based upon the cards that you've been dealt, that determines your favor with God or the universe. That's never been the case. That's never been how God works. Some of God's chosen people have been required to come through some of the greatest trials. Moses, the same prophet that Islam calls Musa. There's a commonality that we have with Islam. And Moses went through some hell, man. I mean, you want to look for some common bonds, to share, the good news. Yeah, Moses isn't a bad choice, Oh, I would that every man were a prophet unto himself. The words of Moses. Moses desired for us as God's children to progress to a point that we had the understandings that he had received, that we would understand how within ourselves to be led and guided by our own spirits, to understand the nature of the laws of life, to realize that earth can be the kingdom of heaven, but that all of the participants involved have to be willing to play by those rules. If one person is willing to oppose the laws of God in a manner that creates iniquity and causes unrighteousness, well, if you sweep that under the rug, it just kind of keeps building up. The more you sweep under the rug, it doesn't go anywhere. It's still there, At a certain point, it takes men and women, regardless of what religion they belong to, regardless of what walk of life they come from, to be willing to speak openly and honestly so that certain aspects of the human experience become more transparent, so that those of us who are weak, that we can unite and we can take down those who are mighty and strong, who are making decisions narcissistically in ways that create horrible imbalance in the world. Like, this world is being run by insane people. We're paying athletes millions and millions of dollars to kick balls and throw them through hoops, instead of paying teachers millions and millions of dollars who are so talented and capable of teaching that they can express their knowledge to the world in ways that can lift the next generation. That's what we should do. We should create a school for the earth without cost, so that it's not discriminatory. It doesn't matter if you live in a country over here or a country over there, but that the content of all of that information is free to every man, woman, and child on earth to gain knowledge and to progress and to build themselves without limitation based on, this broken world that we live in, where sadly, many people, if you want them to teach you, they'll be like, well, you got to pay me first. And it's like, oh, what a failure of life we exist in. Like, if the devil could destroy God's world, he would take every ounce of wisdom that exists in one generation and convince them not to share it with the next generation because they're not being compensated appropriately. And then all of the wisdom and knowledge in that generation would die, and the sins of the fathers would fall upon the heads of the children. And the next generation would grow up even more ignorant, than the last was apparently willing to do. So no, I don't believe in that one bit. I I'm all about, I think it's the example of maybe France. It's one of those European countries where they've just made education and healthcare just free. Like, they recognize this is our country, these are our people. We want them to be smart, we want them to be healthy. That's not a bad example of a stewardship, in my opinion. But if you take a nation that does it backwards and they do it differently, and now they take all of the people that are in their own nation and they say, okay, give me if you want to learn. Try to imagine me as a dad being my own country, just hypothetically speaking, right? And the kids in my country, like those are my population of my country. Like I'm the country of Ben, hypothetically speaking. And like in my country, like I got my wife, I got 4 kids. So that's the equivalent of my population. Imagine if I go to each of these kids and I say, hey, listen, would you like to be educated? Would you like to be successful someday? Well, here's what you need to do. Go outside and figure out a way to make some money. Come give me that money. And when you give me that money, I'm going to teach you. But if you don't give me the money, no, I'm afraid you're going to have to remain ignorant. Are you serious? Like, imagine a dad doing that to his own children. Would you suggest that that's an intelligent dad? I don't think so. I would not suggest that that is a righteous dad. If there are children that have been given to me who have been placed within my stewardship, I have a responsibility before God to teach them. I have the responsibility before God to love that child as if I were that child. How would I desire to be loved and cared for and ministered to, and to build the next generation better than the last? But yeah, here in America, it's a capitalist society. So we've got all these schools that want to pretend that, oh, we're more elite than you and we're more elite than you. And so you should pay us more money to come to our school. And I don't know if you've seen what just happened with Cambridge University here recently. The professor that they hired for their DEI nonsense, it turns out the man's whole resume was fake. He plagiarized like the guy was just a sham. And yet the Cambridge University, utterly disgraced because they chose this person. They picked him, and that shows the incompetence of their entire university. They were completely duped. They look so stupid right now. And yet this is Cambridge University. Oh, I went to Cambridge. It's like, dude, you get your sense of self-worth out of where you went to school because you think that the school that you went to is somehow like better than the school that this person went to. I'm sorry. Let me remind you that all light and knowledge comes from our Father in heaven. And if he trusts you to learn something, and for a moment you think you're smart, and you're running around acting like you're better than other people because of the light and knowledge that you're working with, I would suggest that you are demonstrating an error of mental health that will lead to some very uncomfortable curriculum for yourself in your own path. But, everyone's entitled to have their human experience. Me talking about things is not going to change how many drops of blood Jesus Christ had to bear in the garden. Me talking about what's going on in the world is not going to change what God already knows is going to transpire. But, the difference between people who are dialed in and those who are not, sometimes it's the difference between people that are being manipulated and those who are not, But I know that we live in a world where there are evil people that are using misinformation to keep people divided, to manufacture wars, and to manufacture conflict that doesn't even need to be there because these people are sick. Like they benefit from those circumstances, and so they manufacture circumstances that come at the expense of others. This is a form of mental illness. For someone to be doing that, they are mentally ill. Our society needs to recognize these patterns of mental illness. We need to talk about them openly and honestly. The more awareness that we bring to these subjects as a human species, the sooner the planet Earth grows out of the darkness that we are currently in. That's a fact. So the devil, he wants you to stop talking. He wants to stack the deck. He wants to make people that might talk about things that would be important seem wackadoodie and crazy and invalidate them, because no, we want to keep this shit controlled. We want to keep this fucked up world the way that, it is for the devil, right? No, we don't. Drag what is in darkness into the light. That's what we want. We want a world that has greater equality, a world that has greater fairness, a world that has a better onboarding program for the next generation of God's children than what we've inherited. Just because we got born into the world and the world was shit when we got here doesn't mean that we can't leave it better than we found it. I was a Boy Scout, for crying out loud. We learned in Boy Scouts, leave it better than you find it. That was a concept. You go camping, you don't go out there and leave a mess. You don't leave your trash around. You pick it up. You leave that space better than you found it. You are one of God's stewards on earth. Even if you didn't make the mess, it's our world, I'm willing to defend it. I'm willing to admit the things that I've done wrong. I'm willing to admit the things I'm doing wrong. I'm willing to admit my own human experience as it is unfolding, because I know my heart. I know God's love, and I just don't want to participate in this crazy, silly little self-worth game that everyone else is playing. So Mormonism, okay, you want to judge me as being persona non grata, so be it. But here's the question that you have to answer. If you have a stewardship and a child is born into your church, and that child is given a patriarchal blessing in which God says that child is called and chosen for a specific reason, and according to your church, you believe that patriarchal blessing is given by those in authority, by the laying out of hands, that had nothing to do with my, say so or anything I said. That had to do with the patriarch who laid his hands upon my head and spoke as if he spoke from God. Now, if that man did speak from God and what was said about me was true, then why is the church now choosing to see me and say you are an undesirable person? Again, that is only an expression of their own lack of faith, their own spirit of judgment. It's like a baker that puts a cake in the oven and then pulls the cake out when it's like not even finished being cooked and says, nope, that's not a good cake, and throws it away. You should probably allow things to finish cooking before you pass final judgment. Food for thought. But beyond that, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not uphold very specific commandments which have been taught by Christ. They also do not uphold very specific teachings that were given through Joseph Smith the prophet. They've had 200 plus years to implement specific teachings, and they have drugged their heels like slothful servants. But I'm not allowed to point any of that stuff out because these guys are all above me and I'm so far beneath them, But whatever. So yeah, Mormonism, I get it. I'm undesirable. I suppose anyone that might choose to think logically and reasonably, they might be undesirable to you. I don't know. That's just me taking pop shots. But yeah, I can't be a part of a lie. I can't live a fake life like that. That would eat me up inside. I have to be honest. I have to be authentic. I have to be true. I have to be real. And that's not about me wanting to see myself a certain way, I assure you, because if it was about me wanting to see myself a certain way, I wouldn't be doing that. Like, I would not be trying to be authentic, because the authentic version of me, shoot, man, I heard a therapist talking about this the other day on a video I was watching. And he talks about, mama's boys. And a mama's boy, we grow up, and I was a mama's boy. You learn real quick that your acceptance in your family is based on your performance. And if you choose to be authentic and true to yourself and your own human experience, then you get judged and you get pushed away, and love is withheld from you because you're not good enough as you authentically are. And so you're judged for having feelings. You're judged for having your human experience. Because basically, your mom isn't smart enough to recognize that children need to have those experiences, I guess. It's a very repressive parenting style. But these mama's boys, they lack one of two things. Because in that decision, you either have to choose authenticity at the expense of being cast off, or you have to choose acceptance and approval at the expense of authenticity. And again, that's the narcissistic environment that I grew up with. And my witness before the Mormon Church is, if a child of God grows up with certain parental or authoritative variables, it can damage the spirit in that child when they are very young in a manner that hinders their ability to recognize successfully the Holy Spirit, because of the fact that their nervous system is basically being hijacked by another human being who is making themselves God in the moment. And they might be willing to act in ways that violate the basic golden rule. They might be willing to mistreat their own child and be reactive in ways that, and these are generational traumas that unfortunately get passed down. I'm only a second generation Mormon, as they're considered. My parents were first generation. And so, yeah, in a church where you got these families that have got generation after generation after generation of people that have slowly been repenting and refining their families, these people are now judging bottom feeders like me because we're not progressed far enough in their mind. We need to be better than we are according to their relative judgment. But that's not God's teaching. Again, every person is entitled to their own human experience wherever God plants them to progress line upon line and precept upon precept. God does not condemn you for your inability to apply light and knowledge that he has not given you or that you have not received. A perfect God does not do that. And yet, the world that we live in has created God in our own image, and they've created this version of a God that's like a tyrant that is like bad at judgment, that dispenses iniquitous judgment. Like, the version of God that they're selling is like this idea of a monster under your bed. It's not real. It's just a scary thought that creates fear mongering. But yeah, anyway, these are my rants. I'm obviously someone who's got my own challenges of mental health in life. I wish that I didn't have these trials. I sincerely do. There was a time in my life, I don't think that I struggled with the intensity of some of the symptoms of, insecurity or anxiety or, anyway, the list goes on. There's a host of challenges that I face as a person because as a young boy, my family was torn apart at an early age. At a later point, I was even homeless on the street. Like, I grew up in a rough situation. I didn't grow up, with, a lot of hugs and affection. My dad was not someone that was an affectionate man. He was raised very hard. And like, I remember as a small boy crying to my mom and asking her, like, why does my dad not tell me that he loves me? and she's just like, well, that's how your dad is, that's how he was raised. He grew up in a family that, they didn't express feelings. And she's like, but he does love you, and I had to like literally teach my own father how to say I love you, and I'd like force it in at the end of a conversation on the phone. Okay, Dad, I love you. And he'd be like, all right, son, we'll talk to you soon. And like he just didn't know how to express that emotion. It was so weird. Like, but that was his curriculum, that was based on the difficulty of his upbringing. But I kept doing it. And then finally, my dad was like, I love you too, son. And like that meant the world to me. Like he finally said it, and after that, like ever since then, like our relationship changed, and my dad was capable of acknowledging that, he felt that way, but I mean, still talk is cheap, right? Actions speak louder than words. And my dad thankfully demonstrated love in some ways that he knew how to. And in the ways that he didn't know how to, I'm choosing to try and do better. And in all of the ways that I won't know how to, I'm teaching my children to do even better than me. And I'm teaching them that example to teach to their children also. God knows all things. God knows things as they were. God knows things as they are. God knows things as they yet will become. God already knows my end from my beginning. It is not a mystery to God how the dominoes fall over when they get tipped. He set them all up. So my fear of not being good enough, my fear of, abandonment, judgment, rejection, it all comes from very unhealthy parenting and in part the traditions of our fathers, of the tribe that I have been raised in. They have very unhealthy forms of influence that are occurring for the children within that tribe. And I share this not to condemn my tribe. I share this because I know that I'm not alone. I know that there are other people in this world. Maybe they belong to other tribes than my tribe. Maybe they belong to different nations, different walks of life. Maybe they were raised in different religious settings. But still, the influences had similarities. And when we start to talk about those similarities, this is when we can begin to, again, restore balance in a world. It shouldn't be this broken. Life shouldn't be this fragmented. So I believe in unity. I believe in love. I believe that love has to be a verb. Love is not spoken. Sure, you can say you love it, so you can speak the word, but love is not love without the expression of our energy for and in behalf of the well-being of someone else in a manner that literally requires our sacrifice at the same time. Like all of those things together, working together, that's what love looks like when it's occurring. And without sacrifice, it's not love. It's not. It's, convenient. But I assure you, it's absent of what love can be or should be. And to water it down, it does a disservice to the accuracy of words. So this is my morning rant. Again, every day of my life, I wake up and I'm faced with trauma. And it sucks, man. Like every single day, And how I respond to that trauma, I can go pop some pills to try and reduce anxiety. I can go use some cannabis to try and, reduce the cortisol. I can, try to numb and mask the pain. But the fact is that I need this pain to get out of me. I need to release this pain. And there's a teaching that says that a pain that is shared is a pain that is cut in half. So who knows? Maybe if I, whine and complain enough, I can release this pain from my soul, and it won't continue to rob me of my quality of life. But yeah, I mean, in the mornings I wake up, I've got trauma going on. Sometimes there's certain thoughts, certain things that happen that are just like, yeah, you remember that time this thing happened? And it's like the devil's just sitting there waiting to roast me and be like, oh yeah, God, you remember this? This one bothers you. Let's mess with you on this. And it's like, and then I've got to deal with these ruminating thoughts, these negative thoughts that just impair my ability to focus. And doesn't it suck that I live in a world that has bullied the shit out of me so much that, like, I'm stuck with a brain that's trying to correct the damage that's been done to me, instead of being able to actually apply my mind in a way that might be able to make this world a better place. That's just unfortunate. But that applies to me, that applies to you, that applies to all of us. Doesn't it suck that we live in a world that's so broken that from one day to the next, there are things that have to rob us of our energy and our focus and attack our sense of self, when what we're trying to do is just, build a farm and build a better life and, play the game of life. There is an adversary to our souls. There is a devil that does exist. And there are those that make decisions that give power to the devil. And there are those who make decisions to work against and to fortify the kingdom for all of us against those things. So I'm the crazy, mentally ill, undesirable Mormon. My own mother didn't want me. My father walked out on me when I was 8. My religion threw me away when I suffered a mental health breakdown after my dad died. And they've been bullying my wife and my children ever since because I have mental health afflictions. Go figure. Does that sound like a church that's being led and guided by God to you? One that treats people who are afflicted in that way? Who withhold love from those who stand in need because of judgment? This is godly? That's the example of a church that's being led and guided by Christ? Because literally it created such an attack on my paradigm as a person. Like, I was literally like sitting there wrestling within myself. I'm like, God hates me. Like, I'm a horrible, horrible person. Like, I'm struggling with these afflictions. I'm trying my best. I can't do better than I'm doing. And I'm being hated. Like, and they gaslit me. They convinced me that God sees me as undesirable. And then they think that I'm going to want to jump through their hoops to prove that I'm good enough for them. No, what I want to do is take what they've done and expose it as the abusive framework that it actually is, contrary to their own teachings, the hypocrisy, the bullying, the mental, emotional, and psychological abuse that it creates. What I want to do is descend below all things that God might see fit to inflict upon me. I don't want to hide my curriculum. I don't want to hide the fact that, I'm dealing with feelings or emotions. That is my curriculum. And I want to face that curriculum head on. And you know what? I may be dumber than a box of rocks. There might be so many people in this world that are infinitely smarter than me that they're like, dude, you're dumb. How do you not know how to do that? How do you not know how to respond to that situation? Again, no child on earth knows how to do something that they've never been taught. So again, I'm sorry if I haven't been taught something. I'm sorry if I'm not smart enough in your mind to be good enough to be part of your cool kids club. But I was just trying to be a student of life, and I made the mistake of trying to fit in where I didn't belong. So lesson learned. I won't make that mistake again. Now I'm going to take the battle scars of my life and share with the world and teach and hopefully leave it better than I found it. So yeah, That's my rant. Keith Forsburg, bro, you suck to lie about people, bro. I wish you were really my brother. I wish you were willing to admit your deception. I wish you were willing to take accountability in the ways that you're not. But if that's who you choose to be as a person, may God have mercy on your soul, and I wish you well. But you refuse to apply the gospel of reconciliation or the principles of conflict resolution as they're taught specifically in the scriptures. You've replaced the literal word of God that you claim you believe in by trusting in your own arm of flesh and mavericking into existence some mechanism that came at my expense and literally omitted truth. So that's deceptive. If any of my children grow to adulthood and demonstrate the lack of integrity that Keith Forsburg demonstrated by omitting truth and stacking the deck against a member of his own church, I am a complete failure as a man if my child grows up and does that to another human being. In the same way that your daddy failed you, Keith. I forgive you. You're my brother. We all make mistakes. Now the question is, when are your balls going to drop? And when are you actually going to take accountability and step up to the plate like a man? Or are you going to keep hiding your sins in the least degree? That's your choice, my dear brother. Our Father in heaven already knows the choices you make.